When most people hear $800 million, they think luxury, excess, maybe even greed. But in Céline Dion's case, that number holds something else entirely: grief. Because what her family sees in her fortune isn't just money. They see a lifetime of sacrifice, heartbreak, and relentless dedication wrapped into every dollar she ever earned. Let's start with the facts. Céline's net worth is estimated at $800 million. That figure comes from decades of global tours, record sales exceeding 250 million albums, and her legendary Las Vegas residencies, which alone brought in over $600 million in ticket sales. Add to that her perfume empire, clothing ventures, and high-value properties, and the number begins to make sense. But behind all that success is a woman who never really stopped to rest. Her Las Vegas deal in 2003 was seen by many critics as a career dead end. But she proved them all wrong. Instead of fading into obscurity, she turned Vegas into her kingdom, performing over 700 shows in her first run, breaking revenue records and reshaping what it meant to be a live performer. It wasn't just entertainment, it was Céline building a fortress, one forged out of pain, performance, and sheer stamina. But here's what most people don't know. While the stages were bright, her personal life was dimmed by tragedy and health scares. She pushed through migraines, vocal injuries, exhaustion, and silence that screamed louder than any crowd. And yet, she kept showing up, night after night, singing songs that weren't just hits, they were emotional lifelines. She gave her voice to the world, even when her own world was falling apart. Her fortune also includes real estate scattered across North America, a $72 million Bahamian-style estate in Florida, a $25.5 million private island chateau in Quebec, and a $4.5 million Nevada mansion where her children still live today. Inside those walls, laughter, echoes, and the memory of a mother who gave everything she had. Even her cars, like a Maybach 62, Mercedes-Benz S350, and Cadillac Escalade, aren't just luxury vehicles. They were companions during her tours and silent witnesses to the highs and lows she carried behind the scenes. And yet, what's most telling is how she used that wealth. She didn't build a palace to hide in. She built a home to protect her family, a space to recover, and a legacy to pass on. Her private jet, a $42 million Bombardier Global Express, wasn't just a luxury ride. It was a way to keep moving when grief threatened to make her stand still. This isn't just a story of money, it's a story of endurance. And the more you learn about how Céline Dion earned, kept, and used that wealth, the more you understand why her family cries, not because of what she left behind, but because of what it cost her to build it. Before she had millions, Céline Dion had nothing but her voice. Born on March 30th, 1968 in Charlemagne, Quebec, she entered the world as the youngest of 14 children in a household filled with music, but not much else. Her parents were both musicians, but they struggled to keep food on the table and heat in the home. Céline's first crib wasn't a crib at all, it was a drawer lined with blankets, pulled from a wooden dresser in the corner of a small room. There wasn't enough food, there wasn't enough space, but there was always sound. Music was the only thing they had in abundance. Her siblings practiced in the evenings, their notes drifting through cold, uninsulated walls. Those lullabies weren't for her, but she heard them anyway, absorbing the rhythms, the tones, the emotions, long before she ever understood what they meant. What's wild is how early her talent revealed itself. By age 5, Céline sang at her brother's wedding, not as a child doing a cute performance, but as someone who already held pitch and emotion like a seasoned artist. By 12, she had co-written her first song with her mother and recorded a demo with her brother Michel. It was just one tape, mailed to one man, and that's where the miracle began. Here's the turning point most people forget. That tape landed on the desk of René Angelil, a music producer in Montreal. When he heard her voice, he cried. He didn't just hear talent, he heard something bigger. He believed in her so deeply, he mortgaged his own home to fund her first album. That wasn't a business decision, that was faith. A full-grown man betting everything on a 12-year-old girl with crooked teeth, shy eyes, and a voice that didn't seem to belong to her small frame. Céline wasn't a polished pop product. There were no stylists, no publicists, no label executives crafting her image. What she had was raw talent, and a will to work harder than anyone else in the room. She practiced her French vowels in the mirror. She learned to pronounce English phonetically before she could even understand the words. She studied breath control, pitch and emotional expression like it was her only way out, because it was, and the payoff came fast. In 1982, at just 14 years old, she performed at the Yamaha World Popular Song Festival in Tokyo in front of 115 million viewers. That moment wasn't just a breakout, it was a message to the world. You can't ignore me. But success didn't mean freedom. While other kids went to prom, Céline was waking up at 5 a.m. for sound checks. She didn't attend school dances or hang out at malls. She was in freezing studios recording albums. She didn't learn how to be a teenager. She learned how to survive in an industry that demands everything, and yet she never once complained. In her memoir, My Story, My Dream, she said, "I don't remember prom. I remember microphones." It's important to understand this part of her story. The foundation of her massive fortune wasn't built with gold. It was built with sleepless nights, long flights, missed family milestones, and a voice that became her lifeline. She didn't just sing to make money. She sang to feed 14 mouths, to honour her parents' dreams, and to make sure no one in her family ever had to go hungry again. That's the kind of wealth no dollar sign can measure. Most music careers begin with talent. Céline Dion's began with a gamble. When René Angelil mortgaged his house to fund her first album, he didn't just invest in a voice, he risked everything on a 12-year-old girl with no industry support, no English fluency, and no track record. If that debut album flopped, he would have lost his home. But René didn't blink. That move would change both their lives forever. The album did well in Quebec, and quickly, Céline became a rising star in French-speaking Canada. But René had bigger plans. He wanted her to break into the English-speaking market, even though people laughed at the idea. Executives told him flat out, French singers don't sell in the US. And Céline? She barely spoke the language. She had to learn it phonetically, line by line, word by word. But René wasn't managing a client. He was mentoring a prodigy. He shielded her from the chaos of fame, handled every detail of her career, and made sure she never had to deal with things she wasn't ready for. In the early days, he even turned down record deals that didn't respect her value. He waited until the right offer came, and when it did, Céline was ready. In 1990, she released her first English-language album, Unison. It was a risky move, but it worked. Songs like Where Does My Heart Beat Now climbed the charts, introducing her to a whole new audience. But that success didn't come overnight. It was built on years of preparation, practice, and personal sacrifice. By the time her voice hit the global stage, it was already battle-tested. Here's what makes this chapter so critical. While most artists spend their early years enjoying youth, Céline was working. And she wasn't working for vanity, she was carrying the expectations of an entire family on her back. She wasn't just building a career, she was digging her family out of generational poverty, brick by brick, performance by performance. And through it all, René was by her side not just as a manager, but as a source of safety. Over time, their bond deepened. While the world saw a young star climbing the charts, behind the scenes was a man who believed in her more than anyone, and a girl who leaned on that belief as her foundation. Eventually, that trust turned into love. At age 19, Céline wrote him a letter confessing feelings she had kept to herself for years. At age 20, they quietly began a relationship. Hidden not because they were ashamed, but because they were protecting something fragile, something real. Their love wasn't loud, it was loyal. And when they married in 1994, it wasn't a surprise to those who knew them well. It was the natural result of two lives so deeply intertwined, you couldn't separate where one ended and the other began. That relationship would become Céline's emotional backbone. René wasn't just a business partner. He was the man who carried her when she was too tired to stand, who believed in her when she couldn't sing, who made her feel safe enough to be her most vulnerable self. And that's why, when he was gone, everything else, money, fame, even music, felt like it was crumbling. Céline Dion's success may look effortless from the outside, but the truth is far more brutal. Fame didn't just ask for her time, it demanded her youth, her freedom, and every ounce of energy her body could give. While other teenagers were worried about homework and curfews, Céline was flying between countries, sleeping in hotels, and living out of suitcases. She had no normal. Her entire teenage life was shaped by microphones, studio lights, and constant expectations. The world applauded her vocals, but few noticed the cost. From her earliest albums to her first world tours, Céline performed like her life depended on it, because in many ways it did. Her family's financial survival still rested on her shoulders, and the pressure to keep succeeding never let up. Every album had to chart, every performance had to hit, every appearance had to impress. And yet, she never broke down, not in public. But here's the reality most people never saw. Behind the red carpets and stadium shows were missed birthdays, skipped holidays, and quiet loneliness. She once said, "I remember microphones more than I remember milestones." And that wasn't just a poetic quote, it was her truth. She didn't go to prom, she didn't have a first kiss in the back of a movie theatre. She had interviews, sound checks, rehearsals. Even when she became a household name, she couldn't slow down. The more successful she got, the more the machine demanded. And she gave it everything, her voice, her health, her privacy. By the late 1990s, Céline had become unstoppable. Her duet on Disney's Beauty and the Beast earned her first major US acclaim, but it was My Heart Will Go On from Titanic in 1997 that changed everything. That single didn't just top the charts, it became the defining ballad of a generation. It won an Academy Award, a Grammy, and sold over 30 million copies. But that kind of global success doesn't come without cracks forming beneath the surface. Here's the twist that few people talk about. During her peak years, Céline was already dealing with health issues. She experienced migraines that left her dizzy and disoriented. She pushed through vocal strain that would have sidelined other singers for months. Her body was sounding alarms, but the show had to go on. So she kept pushing, because when you carry the dreams of your entire family, there's no such thing as taking a break. Her life became a cycle of airports, hotel rooms, and backstage dressing areas where she'd sometimes break down, alone, only to pull herself together moments before the curtain rose. And still, she never lost her connection to the audience. That's what makes her so rare. Even when she was physically exhausted, emotionally spent, or mentally drained, she walked onto the stage with a voice that could still make people cry. Her songs weren't just performances, they were conversations with millions of strangers who somehow felt less alone because of her. That bond with the crowd was unshakable. And it's a big reason why she kept pushing, even when her world behind the spotlight was slowly falling apart. Because for her, singing wasn't just a job. It was her way of surviving, and making sure others survived with her. Behind every note Céline Dion ever sang was one quiet, steady presence, René Angelil. Long before they became husband and wife, he was the foundation beneath her rising career. And when their relationship grew into something deeper, it wasn't fast or flashy, it was deliberate. The world saw the glitter, the gowns, the sold-out shows, but René was always behind the curtain, shielding her from the chaos. They met when Céline was just 12 years old. For years, he stayed in the background, making decisions, building her career, guiding her path, but never seeking the spotlight himself. He didn't fall in love with a celebrity. He fell in love with the soul of a girl who just happened to be gifted beyond belief. By the time Céline confessed her feelings in a letter at age 19, it wasn't some teenage crush. It was the beginning of something that had grown quietly through years of trust, care, and constant companionship. They kept their relationship private, not because they were hiding it, but because they were protecting it. When the world finally found out, Céline didn't shrink from judgment. She stood by her love with quiet confidence. In 1994, they got married at the Notre Dame Basilica in Montreal, the same place Céline would return to years later for a much more painful reason. Their wedding was more than a celebration. It was a promise between two people who had already weathered a decade of pressure, fame, and personal sacrifice. René was more than a husband. He was her mirror, her buffer, her anchor. When she was too tired to speak, he spoke for her. When she didn't believe she could sing, he reminded her of why she started. He handled contracts, appearances, business deals, everything, so that Céline could focus on her art without having to compromise her soul. But here's the part that really matters. Their love wasn't about big public displays. It was built on whispered reassurances, late-night handholds, quiet mornings in hotel rooms before world tours. When she sang about love, it wasn't make-believe. She was singing about him. And he was always listening, just out of sight. As they started a family, their bond only grew stronger. Renee stood by her through countless IVF procedures, hospital visits, and emotional breakdowns. He didn't just help her build a career, he helped her build a life. And when their children arrived, he was as present for lullabies and baby bottles as he was for arena shows and award ceremonies. But love, no matter how deep, doesn't protect you from fate. And in the 2010s, Renee's health began to fail. It started with small things, doctor visits, fatigue, but it eventually escalated into something far more serious. In 2013, he was diagnosed with throat cancer, a battle that Céline would walk with him every single step of the way. She postponed shows, adjusted her schedule, and eventually stepped back from performing altogether. Not because she had to, but because nothing mattered more than being there for him. Those final years weren't spent in luxury. They were spent in hospital rooms. While the world still saw Céline in designer dresses and under spotlights, the truth was much quieter. She was whispering lullabies to the man who had once told her she could conquer the world. She was watching him fade. And when he took his last breath in January 2016, Céline's world split in half. Her husband, her manager, her protector, gone. And with him, a part of her own voice disappeared. Losing Renee would have been more than enough pain for one lifetime, but Céline Dion wasn't given that mercy. Just 2 days after Renee passed away, Céline's brother Daniel Dion also died, another brutal blow from cancer. It was an emotional collapse that no amount of preparation, fame, or fortune could soften. One loss was a soulmate, the other was a thread from her childhood, the brother who had been there from the very beginning. 2 funerals in 1 week, 2 caskets, 2 final goodbyes. It didn't feel real, and for a while, she moved through the motions in a kind of stunned silence. Here's why this moment matters more than headlines will ever explain. Daniel wasn't just another sibling. He had been there during the earliest days of their family's musical journey. He was a piece of the past that kept Céline grounded, someone who remembered the cold floorboards of their small house in Charlemagne, who had heard her sing before the world ever did. Losing him meant losing part of that origin story, part of her identity. The media caught glimpses of her during those days, dressed in black, expression calm but hollow. But what they didn't see were the nights she spent alone in their Montreal home, wrapped in silence. Friends and family say she would hold photographs, lips moving without sound, remembering voices now gone. Grief doesn't always scream, sometimes it just lingers. And for Céline, it began to settle in her body. Over time, her health began to show signs of wear. Her weight dropped, her features grew sharper. She was still beautiful, still graceful, but quieter, thinner, like something in her had dimmed. But long before these losses, there was another heartbreak, one that happened far from the public eye. Her niece Karine, just 16 years old, died of cystic fibrosis. It wasn't front-page news, but it was a wound that never fully healed. Céline had often visited Karine in the hospital, holding her hand beside beeping machines, hoping that her voice could bring peace where medicine could not. And when Karine passed, Céline didn't make a public announcement. She wrote a song. The song was Vol, French for fly. It was a lullaby, a prayer, a goodbye written not for the charts but for the stars. She didn't belt it for applause. She whispered it for the niece she loved, the young girl who never had a chance to grow up. This wasn't just grief. It was a series of emotional fractures, each layered on top of the other. Céline kept moving forward. Yes. But with every loss, Renee, Daniel, Karine, something chipped away at her core. Her resilience remained, but it wasn't untouched. She carried the weight of those absences into every performance, every note, every encore. And when you look at the empire she built, the fortune, the tours, the homes, the accolades, it's easy to think she had it all. But what her family sees in those numbers is different. They see what she gave up, the people she lost, the battles she never advertised, because every dollar in her name was earned through grief, one note at a time. For Céline Dion, motherhood wasn't just a dream, it was a war. After decades of singing love songs to the world, what she wanted most was to share that love with a child of her own. But becoming a mother didn't come easily. Behind the scenes, she faced a long, painful journey filled with hormone injections, failed procedures, and sleepless nights praying for a miracle. After marrying René Angélil, Céline began IVF treatments almost immediately. The world saw her smiling on red carpets, but what they didn't see were the bruises on her stomach from needles. The press celebrated her albums, but no one mentioned the tears she cried in fertility clinics after hearing the words, "Not this time." It took years and 2 surgeries to finally hear a heartbeat. In January 2001, Céline gave birth to her first son, René Charles Angélil, and that moment, more than any standing ovation or award, changed her forever. She often said that hearing his cry for the first time was the only performance that ever truly took her breath away. It was a victory not just of science, but of hope. But her fight for family wasn't over. After taking time off to raise René Charles, she attempted to expand her family again. In 2009, the public thought she was busy recording new music. The truth? Céline suffered a miscarriage, another blow delivered in silence. No headlines, no statements, just pain, hidden behind hotel curtains and performance schedules. Still, she didn't give up. At age 42, after more rounds of IVF and deep emotional exhaustion, she gave birth to twins, Nelson and Eddie, in October 2010. These 2 boys were more than miracles. They were proof of her refusal to surrender. Proof that even after the heartbreak of loss, joy was still possible. But here's what most people forget. With René's declining health, Céline was suddenly carrying more than motherhood. She became her husband's caregiver, her family's emotional anchor, and the sole parent of 3 young children all at once. When René passed in 2016, Céline wasn't just left widowed. She was left with the full responsibility of raising 3 boys alone. And she did it without fanfare, without a press tour, and without seeking attention. She tucked them into bed while her own heart ached. She attended school meetings while quietly grieving backstage. Her wealth may seem like it built her a comfortable life, but in truth, it gave her the space to protect her children from the spotlight. Even today, she supervises their education, their emotional development, and their exposure to fame, keeping them grounded in a world that once tried to consume her. And despite her health battles, she still sings to them, not for the charts, not for the cameras, but for bedtime, for comfort, for connection, because even when her voice is fragile, her love isn't. These are the things her family sees when they look at her fortune, not just dollars, not just homes, but the silent battles, the quiet victories, and the woman who fought like hell to bring her sons into the world and keep them safe in it. By the time Céline Dion stood in the Notre Dame Basilica again in 2016, she was a different woman. It was the same church where she had once walked down the aisle in a gown, full of promise and joy. But this time, the walk felt like a lifetime. It was René's funeral, and she was walking alone. The pew beside her was empty, but the air was heavy with his memory. The man who had once stood backstage during every ovation, who had whispered confidence into her heart before every show, was now gone, and the silence he left behind was louder than applause had ever been. But the tragedy didn't stop there. Just 2 days later, Céline's older brother Daniel lost his battle with cancer. Back-to-back funerals, back-to-back heartbreaks. Within 48 hours, she lost both her life partner and one of her oldest companions. It was grief that didn't ask permission. It just came, and kept coming. Here's what makes this moment so haunting. Céline didn't break publicly. She didn't cry for the cameras. She didn't collapse under the flash of photographers. But those closest to her whispered about quiet nights in Montreal, where she would sit alone in the dark, holding a photo, rocking slightly, lips moving without sound, mourning in the only way she knew how, privately. At Daniel's memorial, she didn't perform. She lit candles. She stood in silence. She grieved like a daughter, not a superstar. Her hands shook as she hugged mourners. Her voice, once strong enough to fill stadiums, now flickered through whispered prayers and soft farewells. The strength she showed was impossible to measure, but undeniable. And then came a moment of private devastation that the world never fully saw. Long before she was famous, long before Vegas or Grammys, Céline faced a sorrow that never made headlines. Her 16-year-old niece Karine, battling cystic fibrosis, passed away in a quiet hospital room. Céline had often visited Carine not as a singer, but as an aunt. She would sit beside her, holding her hand, singing lullabies as oxygen machines hummed around them. When Carine passed, Céline didn't issue a press release. She went home, sat at her piano, and wrote Vol, a song about letting go, about flying free. It remains one of her most sacred recordings. This pattern of pain woven through her life is part of what makes her legacy so meaningful. Every performance since those losses carried more than lyrics. Every bow held the weight of people no longer present to see it. And still, she stood. Still, she sang. But here's the shift that changed everything. In December 2022, after years of physical, Céline revealed that she had been diagnosed with stiff person syndrome, a rare and debilitating neurological disorder that causes severe muscle spasms, loss of mobility, and intense stiffness throughout the body. She had been dealing with it in silence, masking it with makeup, powering through shows, leaning on willpower when her body wanted to quit, and once again she had to cancel everything. Las Vegas residencies, world tours, appearances, all gone in a moment, not because she lost her voice, but because her body had started to betray it, and yet her spirit did not break. She began treatment, she adjusted her diet, she met with specialists, she cut back on public exposure not to hide, but to heal, because after a lifetime of giving the world everything, Céline had finally been forced to turn inward. Céline Dion's body was breaking down, but she refused to go quietly. After revealing her diagnosis with stiff person syndrome in late 2022, fans around the world were stunned. But the truth? The signs had been there for years. She had been fighting through pain silently, brushing it off as fatigue or minor illness when, in reality, her body was already fighting a war. It started small: tightness in her chest, vocal fatigue, stiffness in her back. But slowly, the symptoms got worse. Her muscles would lock up without warning. She began having spasms so severe they left her trembling backstage. And still, she kept performing. Here's where things took a darker turn. Behind the curtains, Céline began depending on medication just to function. At one point, she admitted to taking up to 90 milligrams of Valium a day, not to relax, but just to stand, just to get through a show. It wasn't about addiction, it was about survival. When your body turns against you, you reach for whatever lets you keep going. But eventually, even Céline had to stop. Doctors advised her to cancel everything. World tours, her anticipated Vegas comeback, it all had to go. She was no longer in control of her instrument. Her voice, which once soared effortlessly through octaves, now wavered under the weight of involuntary spasms. In her documentary, I Am Céline Dion, the world finally got to see the truth. One scene shows her lying on a therapy table, face twisted in pain, her limbs stiffening uncontrollably. Her therapist gently whispers, "Squeeze if it hurts." And she does, again and again. Not a single note in the air, just quiet suffering, no glitter, no lights. Just the woman behind the legend, and yet, even in that vulnerable state, she found strength. She whispered in the studio, "If it cracks, it cracks. But if it works, it'll be the happiest day of my life." That wasn't showbiz talk. Voice of a woman who had never stopped fighting. Not for fame, not for money, but for the right to express herself. This diagnosis didn't end her story, it simply rewrote it. She now lives mostly in Las Vegas, in a $4.5 million estate. Not flashy, but quiet. Her once massive real estate empire, including the $72 million Bahamian mansion and Quebec chateau, has been sold or carefully protected. Not out of financial need, but out of focus. Her priorities have changed. Now every day is about healing. She works with a team of specialists, therapists, nutritionists, vocal coaches, trying to recover some form of physical freedom. Her meals are built for anti-inflammatory health. Her exercise is low impact, focused on preserving mobility. And though she appears rarely, when she does, people don't see a diva. They see resilience. This is what her fortune protects now. Not fame, not luxury, but her ability to live, to care for her sons, and to preserve her voice, even if only for lullabies whispered in the hallway, because even if the stage stays empty, the music hasn't stopped. In 2020, before her own illness became public, Céline Dion faced yet another quiet heartbreak. This time it was her mother. Thérèse Dion, lovingly known as Maman Dion, passed away at the age of 92. For Céline, this wasn't just the loss of a parent, it was the loss of her foundation. Her mother had been there from the very beginning, the one who believed in her long before anyone else. The one who had written her first songs, stood beside her during auditions, and guided her through the industry with quiet grace. This loss was different. It didn't arrive with the shock of illness or the glare of cameras. It came softly, like the closing of a long chapter. Thérèse had lived a full life, yes, but for Céline, it marked the end of something sacred. The last living tie to her childhood, her roots, her earliest memories of music was now gone. And true to who she is, Céline didn't cancel everything or hold a press conference. She performed that same week, dressed in black, her spine straight, her voice steady, and her heart shattered. She sang not because she was over the pain, but because it was the only language she had ever known to process it. Here's what this moment revealed. Despite the wealth, the fame, the acclaim, Céline Dion is still, at her core, a daughter, a sister, a mother, a woman who has been shaped by unimaginable loss and unimaginable love. Today her life is quieter, but no less meaningful. Her eldest son, René Charles, now 23, is carving out his own creative path as a rapper and producer under the name R.C. Angel. Her twins, Nelson and Eddie, are growing up with balance, shielded from fame, but deeply connected to their mother's legacy. Céline still guides their education, she still makes breakfast, she still hums lullabies, even if her voice sometimes cracks. And if she can't hit the high notes anymore, it doesn't matter. Because her real impact was never about the notes, it was about what those notes carried. Her fortune today isn't just numbers in a bank account, it's homes filled with memories. It's the safety net that allows her sons to chase their dreams without pressure. It's the hospital rooms she helps fund, the charities she continues to support quietly, the legacy of care that lives beyond the spotlight. Even as her body grows more fragile, her story grows stronger. And this is why her family cries, not out of sorrow for her wealth, but because they know what it cost her. They know the songs she sang when she was in pain. They know the performances she gave when she was grieving. They know the nights she stood on stage with a smile on her face and a storm in her chest, because she felt the world needed her more than she needed rest. And now, as her voice grows quiet, her legacy only grows louder. She may no longer walk onto a stage, but her music still walks into wedding halls, hospital rooms, and quiet bedrooms where someone needs to hear, "You are not alone." Because Céline Dion didn't just leave behind a fortune, she left behind a map of how to endure, how to love without limit, and how to keep singing even when everything inside you wants to go silent. If there's one thing Céline Dion never lost through grief, illness, or exhaustion, it's her sense of purpose. Even as her ability to sing became uncertain, her will to live fully never wavered. And part of that will is now channeled into how she prepares for the future, not just for herself, but for the 3 sons she's fought so hard to protect. Though she's never made a formal public announcement, those close to the family have confirmed that Céline has taken major steps toward estate planning. This isn't about fear, it's about clarity. She knows what she's built, and she knows how she wants it to be passed on, with intention, not chaos. Her estate is massive, hundreds of millions in assets, intellectual property, royalties, real estate, and business ventures. But she's not interested in flashy inheritances or headlines. Her goal is to create stability for her children, to make sure that no matter what happens, they're protected. And more than that, she wants them to know why she built what she did. And here's what makes this different from most celebrity fortunes. Céline Dion is not creating a legacy based on power. She's building one rooted in meaning. Her sons won't just inherit money, they'll inherit a roadmap of how to keep going when life knocks you down, how to stay humble when the world lifts you up, and how to love without holding back. She has taught them through example, not words. They've seen her sing with cracked ribs. They've seen her push through funerals and surgeries to keep her promises to fans. They've seen her whisper prayers instead of chasing praise. Now they're starting to return that love. In recent years, René Charles has taken on more responsibility within the family. He's been seen managing details during Céline's hospital visits, helping navigate press inquiries, and stepping in to support his younger brothers. It's clear that the values his mother instilled in him, discipline, kindness, resilience, have taken root. And as for Nelson and Eddie, They're not entertainers, not yet anyway. They are being raised in a home where love is measured not in applause, but in presence. They are growing up with a mother who may no longer command stages, but who still commands respect, grace, and a deep connection to her own story. This is why her family sees more than wealth when they look at her legacy. They see the woman who turned childhood poverty into global success, the woman who sang through grief, through miscarriage, through chronic illness, the woman who didn't hide her pain, but who never let it stop her either. And they cry, not because they lost her, but because they're watching her lose pieces of herself in real time, yet still rise every morning to give them everything she has left. That's what real wealth looks like. Even now, when the lights are dim, the audience is gone, and the microphones are silent, Céline Dion is still performing. Not on stage, not in gowns, not in front of sold-out arenas, but in the small everyday moments that define who she truly is. She wakes up each day in a body that doesn't always cooperate. Her muscles spasm. Her mobility is limited. Some days, even standing can feel like a mountain. But she still smiles for her boys. She still hums melodies in the hallway. She still makes tea, still checks their homework, still calls relatives just to hear their voices, because strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, slow, and incredibly brave. Céline Dion may no longer travel the world, but her music still does. Her songs still play at weddings, in waiting rooms, in cars during late-night drives. They still bring comfort to the grieving and goosebumps to the hopeful. And even if her vocal cords never fully recover, her voice is already immortal. Here's the truth that makes her family emotional every time they talk about her legacy. Her success was never built to impress. It was built to heal, to connect, to survive. Her fortune came from giving herself, her time, her emotions, her voice, over and over, until there was almost nothing left to give. And even now, she has every reason to pull back, to disappear, to stop fighting. She doesn't. She shows up quietly, strongly, for her sons, for herself. Her wealth isn't just measured in dollars, it's measured in lives touched, in lullabies sung beside hospital beds, in songs written for lost nieces, in love letters to the man who believed in her before anyone else. It's measured in endurance, the kind that can't be counted, only witnessed. So when her family cries, it's not for the houses or the jet or the music rights. It's because they know the cost. The real invisible price of becoming Céline Dion. And yet, she never asks for sympathy. She never stops trying to heal. She just continues, one step, one breath, one soft lyric at a time. This is her true legacy. A woman who stood tallest when life tried to knock her down. A voice that carried millions. And a heart that never stopped loving, even when it was breaking.